Yo, 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 what is going up, guys? It's your boys. Zane and Mackie here, back at it again. Been a hot minute. Got no good excuse besides the fact that our lives are super busy and cool. Like, we got a lot going on. Alhamdulillah, shukr let's get right to it. Zane, how you been, bro?
Bum bum, but we got some excuses. Maybe just not good ones.
We always can get some excuses, but
Maybe.
I ain't built like that.
On a real note though. On a real note though. Okay. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I heard that.
Alright, whatever. We keep it moving. On a real note, it was like the last 10 days of Ramadan. We kind of didn't release an episode there, and then after that, there's really no excuse. But anyways,
This
glad
man.
glad to be back. Sorry we've been missing. We have a couple exciting interviews potentially lined up for you guys. I hope you guys will enjoy. So we haven't been completely slacking off in the intermission. Don't worry.
Yeah, we've been scheming. Crazy though. I want to talk about it because I haven't been able to like talk to the fans about it. Dude, that Justin video that we released right before this one. So this is episode 11. So episode 10 went ham, like hard as a Muslim. Like it went so hard. People loved it. Justin shared it with his people. It is the most viewed episode, I believe. Um, and it became that like in a matter of literally less than a week. It got so many views that YouTube deleted views. I don't know why. And whenever I looked up on Google, why does YouTube delete views? YouTube does that whenever they suspect bot views. So
Ah,
like it's not we didn't even get like more like than like 1,000 views, but it got so many more views in such a small amount of time than our average that YouTube is just like, yeah, bots.
uh-huh. On a serious note, now that we've caught up, you guys know what we have been up to. Um, Obviously, you guys have been watching the news. There has been a lot of noise, right, and rightfully so. Good, good for good for the issue. There's been a lot of noise and um, hubbub around the issue of Palestine and the home evictions and Israel's continuous bombing that they stopped due to a quote unquote ceasefire. But that doesn't mean that the home evictions have stopped taking place in Sheikh Jarrah. And Thoughtful Banter would
It's a
like
cap
to
fire, not a ceasefire, bro.
a campfire. Thoughtful Banter would like to humbly convey our condolences to Palestine and offer our support in whatever way we can,
Absolutely.
whether that be with our hands, our hearts, or our what was it? Our hands,
Our voices, our
our voices.
intentions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've been out at a couple protests. We were supposed to actually record one Saturday, but we actually decided to go there and protest instead. So yeah, just wanted to
Flexing our wokeness on them.
no, just kind of wanted to because I know we have seemingly, I guess, over social media, if you guys follow us, seemingly been pretty silent on it, at least from our thoughtful banter account. So I just wanted you guys to know that we are thinking about it, we are talking about it.
I'm really like it's not happy is not the right word, but for lack of, I'm really happy that right now people are actually posting about Palestine. Growing up for me in our community, it's been pretty normal to see people posting about Palestine. But in terms of the world, like the public posting about Palestine was a really rare thing, especially because there's so much of that space, media space, being controlled by the other narrative. Where anytime there's anything at all spoken about Palestine, the immediate response was anti-Semitism, and people would get shut down like that. Um, and for like the longest time, and now I guess still too, like the issue is not resolved. But for the longest time, I mean, you couldn't say anything on the matter without being neutral, without calling it a conflict, without being like, yeah, pray for both sides. Inshallah, inshallah, both sides get it together. Like, what a bogus way to approach a situation. Like, the most cap possible. Like, you couldn't, you people just couldn't. People weren't just posting on social media being like, "Dog, collect this country, collect this entire country that's committing or attempting to commit a genocide, ethnic cleansing." You know, and I'm just happy to see the world's actually caring. And I think right now what we're seeing is what happened last year with BLM after the lynching of George Floyd, right? Like people have less distractions, people are still at home, people are still working remotely. So people have less garbage to care about and they have more time to, I guess to allow their fitness to be awoken by injustice. So there is a silver lining, at least in that regard.
Could not have said it better myself. I kind of zoned out while Matthew was talking. I'm not gonna lie.
I could tell. Like, yeah. I started talking like 30 seconds, like, yeah, the voice slowly fades out.
I know you could, but it was related. Don't worry, don't worry. It was related. Anyways, let's jump into the topic for today, Mac. What do you think?
I mean, you seem like pretty ready to get into it. So I'm down. I mean, you have so I mean, I guess you have something on your mind that you want to share that's related to the topic. And do you want to give the intro?
No, no, I'll give the intro. So, I don't know how much you guys keep up with like Shia social media, either on Instagram or Twitter. That's mainly the places I notice it at. I'm not really on Facebook too much, but maybe it's there too. But anyways, over the past week, yeah, past week, maybe 2 weeks, um, there was a tweet by a well-known scholar that set the Shia social media verse aflame. um, and in that tweet, I said verse. In that tweet, he talks about this scholar talks about activism, and he talks about the imam's opinion of activists and activism. And yeah, he had a lot to say, and people had a lot to say in response to him. And I think that he had some good points mixed in with some pretty bad points. And then he also the method in which he delivered, I guess the message that he was trying to, or the point that he was trying to make, was a little bit silly in my opinion. So we're just gonna talk about get into all that. I just want to give a brief I guess preface disclaimer. We're talking about this obviously because it's relevant to what we just mentioned. Kind of relevant, not exactly, like I don't think he was talking about Palestine directly, but it's kind of related. Um and one, two, a lot of people were talking about it, so it's good for like views. No, I'm not gonna lie, the algorithm.
For sure, for sure.
And three, uh, you know, this was a tweet. Although this person is a well respected scholar, this was a tweet made on a very very public platform, and I think that makes it open for public critique and public criticism. This is not anything coming at the character of the scholar. This is not me talking about like insulting the intelligence of the scholar, but this is just me talking about um this is us talking about where we thought there were some blunders in thinking, and how maybe the message could have been communicated more effectively. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. I'm not going to read the tweet. You guys can go and try to find the tweet if you want it, if you want to, if you haven't seen it already, or if you guys have seen it and know what I'm talking about, then this will be easy for you to follow. But so before we even get into the content of the tweet, I just want to talk about the delivery. I don't know if Matt has anything to add, but when I initially read this tweet, one thing that some people do on social media, and I think it's not the best habit, is that they tweet things that are hyper inflammatory, that are they use specific language to get the attention of the people that they're tweeting to and about. And then once they get the storm that comes with that attention that they asked for in the way that they worded their tweet, they get confused and baffled at how they're possibly being misinterpreted and how they're possibly getting the kind of reaction that they seemingly set out to get. Now, of course, I don't know the scholar's intentions when he sat down and wrote this tweet, but someone as intelligent as him should have, and honestly, I don't see how could not have known that putting activists in quotation marks, especially during the time that especially during the climate that we're currently in with all the things that are going on in Palestine, and talking about how that is not something that the imam wants. Again, I don't know what his intentions were when he sat down and wrote the tweet, but I can't see, again, as someone as intelligent as this scholar is, how he could not have known that the reaction that he would have got to the tweet would be the reaction that he would have got to the tweet. And I think that if he was truly concerned in spreading the message that he wanted to, he might have chosen a less inflammatory way to put it out there. So before we even get into like the problematic ideas within the content of his tweets, now, looking into the content of the tweet, I said I think he had, so basically he made this one tweet, and then maybe he made like two more after it. After it, it's a long thread. It's a pretty long thread, and I guess he realized how much traction it was getting, and so the thread becomes longer and longer as he clarifies more and more, tries to clarify more and more his stance. And this is, I don't know, again, before we even get more into the content of the tweet, this is probably one of the reasons or one of the dangers, potential dangers with being operating so frequently in the sphere of social media. On Twitter, you have what, 240 characters, something like that, to convey a message, right? So it's hard to capture all the nuance that are in particular issues in that many words. And I think for that reason, you should be careful in sending out one tweet that could be interpreted in so many different ways and so broadly and so vaguely and so generally, especially as someone who is a scholar of knowledge, you know. And I think it's important to hold our scholars to specific standards. Like I don't think that's unrealistic or that's something that shouldn't happen. And I think this is just a perfect example of what can happen with like through social media when you're trying to convey these maybe more complex messages, but the platforms that you're operating on don't allow for that level of nuance. So I just think, again, before we even step into the content, I think on that level it was just a blunder from the beginning. Maybe if he had made a video, because I've seen this scholar put out several YouTube videos. Maybe if he had just been like, you know, check out this YouTube video, and then he in that video he explains what he was talking about. Like I don't know, I feel like there were just a lot of different ways he could have done it. But that's before we even get into the content. There's some good points and some bad points. Let's start with the good, the bad, and then we can end with the good. I think. Um and Matty's moving around right now, but inshallah he'll be able to give some of his perspective on the ideas expressed in this tweet. God, that's so annoying. The ideas expressed in this tweet. So, first of all, he seems uh to make this false dilemma or like this black and white decision between being an activist and being a pious servant, submissive, learned servant that the imam would want in his as like true believers, you know, that Imam Mahdi would want when he comes back. He seems to draw this weird, like arbitrary, in my opinion, I don't see what it's coming from, arbitrary line about you're either pious, submissive, learned, or you're an activist. Or you're an activist, and you can't be both. Now, as far as what to prioritize, I understand what he's saying. You should prioritize being a pious, submissive, and learned youth for the imam, right? And if in your whatever you know, and if in carry out your duties you get labeled as an activist, that's okay, but it's not what you're aiming for. I understand that part of the message, and if that was what he was trying to convey, one, he could have, again, not been as inflammatory. Two, he could have actually actually discussed that instead of saying what he said. Um, so that's number one, weird arbitrary distinction. Number two, I have a very much strong dislike for when people give you standards, but don't tell you specifically like when, like, how much. Let me give you an example. So someone will be like, this happens with marriage all the time. For example, I know we always love to use marriage as an example on this podcast, but anyway, someone will be like, don't get married. You're not ready. Work on yourself first. It's like, okay, I understand that. I can work on myself infinitely. I can literally always become better because I'm far from sinless and I'll probably never reach there. Right?
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean right now.
So how much am I supposed to work on myself before I even consider the thought of getting married? Right? So I don't like when people give these kind of prescriptions but don't give specific prescriptions. So he says later in his tweets, he says that if you achieve these three things, let me try to see if I can find it. Yeah, he says if you achieve these three milestones: submission, piety, and knowledge, and you pursue your obligations accordingly, like then you pursue your obligations accordingly. Any step before that is potentially fatal. And so again, those characteristics, those attributes are beautiful to have. But those even more so, I say, can be can be done and achieved or like done and sought for forever. So if you're gonna give these prescriptions, right? And at least give a measure of like when I can do what. And I don't think there is necessary there might not necessarily be that measure for like, okay, when you're this level of pious, or when you're in this amount of submission, or when you have this much knowledge, you can do XYZ. I understand that. But I don't know. I understand that, but to me it feels irresponsible, grossly irresponsible to discourage people from doing something depending on, like, obviously depending on what the issue is, from doing something good based on them not having enough of these measures, and you don't even give them a metric with which to grade themselves, for example. At least at the very least, be like, if you're doing this regularly, if you're doing this regularly, if you're doing this regularly, this will help you build those things up. At the very least, give me the tools I need to build those things up, even if you don't give me an end goal of with which I can then determine when to enter into the activist field. That's at least better than nothing. And that's actually a little bit more realistic, because I don't think necessarily we have these measures, or those measures are necessarily needed anyway. There are some people who have pursued activism purely, like, I don't know. Oh, let me say, okay, who activism has been their path into Islam. How about that? Activism has been their path into Islam, and then through finding Islam, they were able to cultivate their submission and cultivate their piety and increase their knowledge. You know, so for those people, what kind of message are you sending, and should you be sending that message? I'd say no. Maybe our dear scholar would have a different opinion on that, but I just think a lot of the times, and again, this maybe it's uh, a symptom of the platform that it's being said on, and if it is, I think you should reconsider speaking as much on that. But many of these social media scholars that I see, not this one in particular that I'm talking about, they approach these issues and they talk about these issues, and they remove and strip away every single shred of nuance that could exist inside of the issue. And I don't think it's good, and sometimes I think it's like purposefully disingenuous. And I'll give you an example in this thread. He mentions the authenticity of a hadith. He mentions the authenticity of a hadith, and let me just read, because in my personal opinion, I thought this was a little bit ridiculous, just based on the kind of information that we had. He says, I can't believe I had to say this, but we are in the age of social media theologians, aka the age of utter ignorance. I'm slightly confused there because, he spends a lot of his time on social media as well. I don't know who exactly he's referring to, but anyways, I digress. So here we go.
What? Oh
um,
man. Oh man.
The hadith, those who stay silent while others are oppressed are guilty of oppression themselves, is not a hadith. That's why I said learn first, act second. Now, I don't even know if that's true. I haven't anyways. But let's assume it isn't. Let's assume that he's right. That's not a hadith. Although those exact words have not been uttered, maybe have not been uttered by an imam or an infallible the prophet, maybe none of those hadith, none of those words, exact words have been uttered. But the meaning behind those words, the meaning in those words, which is basically stand up for oppression, stand up against oppression, or else you're just as you, or else you can be considered just as bad as the oppressors. That meaning is present in plenty numerous of authentic traditions that we have. So yes, while those exact words may not be a hadith, it is extremely disingenuous, extremely disingenuous. And as a scholar, you should be even more cautious in the approach you take when discussing these things. It's extremely disingenuous to say that that hadith is not authentic. Yes, again, the exact wording of the hadith is not authentic, but that's not what people don't mean that hadith specifically. Like people like like if there was another hadith that existed with that same exact meaning, people would use it. It's not the wording, it's the meaning that people care about. And it's always the meaning that people care about. So, those are all my personal gripes. I don't know if Matty has
Okay.
anything to add. And then we can get into some of the good things that you said, inshallah.
All right. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I just want to start off with saying, you guys know me. I'm just some dude. And in episodes where it's just me and Hussein talking, you guys know I'm just some dude. Hussein is more learned than me. So obviously, whenever we're talking about a scholar, when I'm talking about a scholar, I know obviously that I know less than a scholar. All right. Not trying to, I'm not trying to flex intellect here. I'm just sharing my personal thoughts because a scholar share their thoughts on a public platform, so that means it's public. And obviously, I'm not here to disrespect or even say, this person is wrong or whatever. I'm just here to share my personal thoughts. So, funny enough, whenever I read the tweet, I liked the tweet because I interpreted it a way different way than some people. I interpreted the tweet as, hey, know justice, know what God says justice is. Don't be a person who identifies as an activist. And what I thought that was, to me, that means people who basically pick what is moral based on what is trending on Twitter. So, for example, tomorrow on Twitter, it might be trending that fat people are oppressed because, or they're oppressed by having calories on food because that gives them PTSD from being called fat. So we have to boycott food labels that show like nutritional value. Like I could literally see that happening, right? Like anything is possible nowadays. And I'm like, yeah, right? Like let's know what standing up for justice is. And that's how I interpreted it. And funny enough, like I was beside my wife and she asked me like, did you see his tweet? And I was like, yeah, I liked it. And she was like, why? And she told me how she interpreted it, which was really interesting, which kind of leads to Brother Hussein's point about why Twitter is not the best place to share uh, opinions that require nuance or do have nuance. So I think the tweet, like ultimately, I don't know what the scholar was trying to say exactly. Um, I assume he had the best of intentions. However, let's be frank here, right? Like whenever you're a scholar, you have a responsibility. I have a responsibility, right? Like even like when Hussein and I before we make these episodes, like we try to be careful. When Hussein and I make these episodes, like we even try to be careful. Like we think out what we're going to say first. We say, okay, we're not going to cross this line or that line because we have responsibility, and a scholar has a way higher responsibility than either of us. So I do think that I interpreted the tweet a different way than Hussein, than many other people, but I think the fact that the tweet was so open up for vague interpretation is part of the problem. I can't
Yeah.
say he did it on purpose, right? That's me saying I know someone's intention. I don't have that power, but I will say, like, come on, you're an intelligent learn a scholar. It's not easy to go to Hausa and learn multiple languages like that alone, right? It's not easy to be in a position where you have to learn to think critically. So you do know that you should know better to an extent, right? Like, come on, it's Twitter. And we do see like there are other ways on social media than to share your opinion. For example, even on Twitter, you could just upload a video of yourself for any kind of subject. If you have an
Yeah.
opinion on anything,
And it
share
could
like
be
a
2 minutes
7,
long, it
15
could be 3 minutes
minute.
long.
It could be like 15 minutes long, like, right? Like, give people your entire explanation, right? So no one gets anything twisted. So at least if they disagree with you, they disagree with what you really think. Um, Personally, I think it's this, like, what do you want people to do? Like, what do you like? What do you mean? Because people kind of fall into this, right? It's like this constant state of preparation, but it doesn't lead to any action. And like Hussein said, like people come to Islam because of activism. I think in general, like in Islam, like I get confused whenever people talk about being one specific good thing when as Muslims we're supposed to be all that is good, right? Like look at all the
Mm-hmm.
99 names of Allah, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
these are all attributes that we seek for ourselves. The identity for myself personally, the identity is to be a Muslim. A Muslim is not just an activist, not just a scholar, not a father, not like you're supposed to do all these good things, right? So
I think his point, like what you're saying, is actually his point.
okay.
But a lot of my, basically a lot of both of our issues is the way in which he expressed it and the platform that he chose to express it on, and how general, vague, broad, unnuanced of an opinion that he actually decided to show.
Yeah, I mean, like I would just say that, like, as a Muslim too, though, like for example, I went to some rallies for Palestine, and I'm seeing people there who might be Muslim, might consider themselves Muslim, but aren't very practicing, right? Um, they're interacting in a way, they're dressed in a way, they're behaving in a way that I'm like, okay, like maybe they're not the most practicing, but that doesn't take away necessarily from what they're doing, right? Because there might be somebody who is like neck in some books, reading Rasalas, reading some hadith, but there's a rally going on about Palestine right now, you know? And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but it to me, it's like, yo, like we have to, like there needs to be a balance. And I don't even think it should be a balance. It just seems like Islam tells us that we have to do the right thing at the right time. So like whenever, like, I mean, there's examples of this in Islam. Hussein is the one that can cite them. But I know there are examples in Islam where, you know, it was wajib to go to war, for example. And there are times that it was wajib, mandatory to not go to war. And it's not about being a warrior, being a pacifist. It's about doing what God wants you to do whenever he tells you to do it.
I think some of the things you mentioned um, are like the good part of the message that, again, that I think that the specific scholar was trying to convey. Now, if you don't have any like specific uh, negatives to take away from the tweet anymore, then I myself would just like to get into some of the things that I thought were actually positive. Actually, we should take a look at and examine more.
Go for it.
Yeah, because I think what it would be dumb for us to do, and I think dumb for most people to do, but you know, social media is what you get, is to only look at something and talk about the negatives of it without also talking about maybe some of the truths in it. Like, you know, we talked about on this podcast many times that, for example, if you go to the masjid and you get judged harshly, for example, yeah, you should not have been judged harshly as far as that person is concerned. They should have been better in the way that they conveyed the information that they wanted to convey to you. But there could have been some truth in it for you to learn from it anyway. So as people who generally preach that, I think looking at this thread of tweets, because it's a lot of tweets actually, like most of the posts I saw on social media did not capture all of the tweets that were actually tweeted. It's a long thread. But anyway, so with that in mind, it would be dumb of us to not go over some of the good things that can be taken away from it. So one was exactly what Matthew said. Um, there is a wisdom in cleaning your room. No, but there is a wisdom in working on yourself, being that servant, and then in fulfilling your duty. Again, like I said, if you're labeled certain things, be labeled, be okay with that label. Like if it's a good label, obviously, you can be okay with that label, but that's not what you're aiming for. And I think later down in the thread, he actually says it's just about what you prioritize. You shouldn't prioritize identifying as an activist. That's not what you should be prioritizing. You should prioritize identifying as a believer, and then whatever comes after that comes after that. He actually mentioned something from his teacher, and he said, I don't call myself a teacher. I don't call myself a writer. I've done all these things, but whatever God or the Imam needs me to be is what I'll be. And there's wisdom and there's beauty to that. I just wish he would have led with it, honestly.
I think that's like really beautiful. And like if you think about it, like look at the downside of what happens whenever you identify as an activist. That means you have to succumb to the opinions of all the other people who are activists. Like, oh, you're not joining our movement? Like you're going to talk about Palestine, we're going to help you with Palestine. But you don't want to talk about our things? Like no, because maybe Islam doesn't allow me to, right?
Yeah.
But if I
And
identify as an activist, I have to be cool and I have to always adjust my values to you, and I don't have your values.
I just wish he would have led with that, because it was buried so deep in all the tweets that the majority of people didn't see it, or they did see it and were still so mad about what was tweeted up first, that they didn't even care to acknowledge that he had said it later. So it's just in my humble opinion, all around, it's just a problematic way of transmitting any sort of worthwhile information.
I will say I can't hate him for that, because I hate on him for that. Bro, I be like making YouTube videos doing the exact same thing, bro. Like this is what every personal development YouTuber does, bro. Like if you all see my channel, plug, like I made a video called "Why You're Depressed," my theory. Like the point of it is to get engagement, and like I get it. So like I feel like on one hand, right? Yes, you have to be responsible and be like a scholar and be noble or whatever. But at the same time, he's trying to use a platform that has youth on it and try to speak their language to get their attention. There are plenty of other scholars on Twitter that don't get as much attention as him because they're boring to follow.
I disagree.
You disagree?
I think it attracts specific like types, like the way that some of these scholars interact on social media attract specific types of people. Like it's not like the boring, like the quote unquote boring scholars. Because for myself, for example, I follow scholars that use social media, interact with social media, and convey a lot of knowledge and never have any issues like this. Right? Never have any issues like this. And it's not that they're boring. I think there are specific types of people that are attracted to the specific types of tweets that some of these scholars put out, or it's the specific type of information that some of these people put out.
I see.
It's not like if it's not like if there were no scholars doing it in a better way, like functioning within that space. It's not like these people like are existing in that space on Twitter. Like there are scholars who are conveying information in different ways available, right? It's not like they're the only ones there. If they were the only ones there, that would be something different. But there are scholars communicating information in a more comprehensive way, but it's not the same type of like clickbait. It's not the same type of like that attracts a specific type of person, if that makes sense. Like, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do. It isn't necessary. Like, I mean, I hate to compare our scholars to, YouTubers, but like, I think it's a good analogy. It's like, there's a YouTuber that, maybe doesn't get the initial amount, like a load of views, because there isn't clickbait. It's like the content is like very authentic. So he's like trusted by his audience whenever you post something, but it's like it's effective, but there's less of that maybe initial engagement. And then there's a YouTuber who maybe has like a title like fine, again I'm not being a hypocrite. I'm saying like this is what I do. Like I'm not. That's why I can't judge him on it, bro. Like I'm not gonna judge someone on something I
No,
literally
but,
do. Like if you go to my YouTube channel, bro, like I do
but,
this. So
but I think the difference is the type of information that people generally consume on each platform, right? Can you hear me?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. So on Twitter, so first of all, let me say this. In the thread itself, like there's a lot of tweets and some of them are literally like hours apart, right? So it could be that someone saw one tweet, saw another tweet, saw another tweet, didn't go back to it, and then 6 hours later there's an additional like 3 tweets added to the thread,
yeah.
right?
There's a better way of doing that,
That's something that
man.
just won't happen in a YouTube video, for example, or even a video on Twitter. It just won't happen.
Which is why
Yes.
I said earlier, I think a video will probably be like the best way to communicate your thoughts. If you have like any in-depth thoughts on a matter, make a video. Like just tweet a YouTube video, even tweet your YouTube video about it.
Yeah, and
If you
so
really
I'm
want to
saying
like
I'm
share
saying
opinion,
due to the nature of the platform that he was operating on, I still think, although people will if they want to misinterpret you, will misinterpret you regardless of uh like how you do it. There is more of an excuse for someone who sees it, like who's on Twitter and misinterprets what was being said, rather than someone who doesn't watch a full video that they should have watched. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand, and honestly, I agree. I agree. You,
What was that?
I said no, you're right.
Um, yeah, but anyways, I was talking about the good things. I completely forgot where I was going.
It's funny.
um,
I don't want to play this game no more.
oh. We were talking about how I thought he should have led with it. That's how we got to this discussion. Okay. Yeah. So anyways, so that aspect of his tweet, um, I think is true. And I think he should have I think he should have led with it. And I think as smart as he is, it's a little bit ridiculous that he didn't lead with it. But another thing that he mentions that I also think is pertinent to mention as well is that sometimes we get obsessed with this activist revolutionary culture, and we begin to think that if people aren't in the streets marching, then they aren't doing anything. And if we're not careful,
Very true.
sometimes that attitude and that way of thinking can even extend to our infallible imams.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it's super common. Like that's true. Like you hear people all the time, and it's funny because there's literally two camps. There's some people who never show up to a protest, like
mhm.
ever, ever, and like it's like they don't believe in them. I'm like, dog, how can you not ever believe in a protest? And then there are people who are like at every single rally, and like, dog, that is literally time consuming. Like you cannot be the fullest, most productive. I can't be the fullest, most productive version of myself. Not even just like on a selfish manner, but even like on a religious one, like the best version of myself that gives to my community. I can't do that if I'm at every protest. There's too many. It takes too
Yeah,
much time. It takes too much energy. So we do see like there are these two camps here that people go way too extreme on either side.
yeah, very much extreme. Um, so yeah, and then a lot of the times he didn't mention this, but I think I'll add this on. A lot of the times people act like Imam Hussein was the only Imam that ever existed. Um, Imam Imam Hussein's fighting
Yeah.
against the government of Yazid, and they talk about that, and they only talk about that again as if he was the only Imam that ever existed, as if his brother before him didn't specifically sign a contract, and give away his authority to keep the peace, and as if Imam Hussein himself didn't live 40 some years before doing what he did. And the imams that came after them, they didn't live under oppressive governments and under oppressive rulers, and did, as far as we know, it didn't start any uprisings or a revolution. And so it is important to not become so obsessed with like identifying as this revolutionary or identifying as activist, that we start to think that we know better, even subconsciously, even on a subconscious level, think that we know better than our imams. Because we have hadith talking about how the people who teach the way of the Ahlul Bayt, when they die the death of Shaheed. Like that is also a very legitimate form of, resistance
Sacrifice.
and sacrifice. Exactly.
Resistance. Like that is, I mean, like that is being revolutionary. And like that's a very good point you make. Like sometimes I think if we're being honest with ourselves, I think if we're being honest about why, because I suffer from this, from being solely focused on revolution, it's because it's fun. There's a lot of adrenaline with thinking about, oh, change, and let's march in the streets. Like it's a very tangible thing. I'm going to go protest at this place. It's a very physical thing, and I understand what I'm going to do, and there's going to be like an impact, and everyone's cheering together and chanting. But then there's also like, okay, what are we going to do to make a good system? Oh, crickets. Both are necessary.
Yeah. So I think that's really